Chapter 358. After she said that, she realized that she seemed to have revealed something. She immediately shut her mouth and refused to say another word. Pei Chi looked at her and only felt that she was pitiful. After being sentenced for so many years, she still felt that she had sacrificed herself for love. Rong Lei was also involved in this matter, right? She asked straightforwardly. Zhou Meilin looked at her defensively. There was a hint of cautiousness in her eyes, like a she-wolf. Then, she let out that mournful voice again. Pei Chi, don't even think about getting any information out of me. I did it alone. It has nothing to do with anyone else. Pei Chi did not say anything. She took out a photo from her pocket and handed it to the other side of the barbed wire. Zhou Meilin's gaze shifted and then landed on it. Her gaze seemed to be frozen as she stared at the photo. It was a selfie of Zhao Ku and Rong Lei. Both of them were naked and they were doing it. She did not believe it. She did not believe it. Pei Chi, this must be a composite, right? Rong Lei would never know a bitch like Zhao Ku. Zhou Meilin stood up immediately. Her fingers gripped the barbed wire so tightly that she almost bled. Pei Chi looked at her coldly as she struggled. She looked as if she would rather die than live. At that moment, she felt a little elated. Zhou Meilin, are you in pain now? You were betrayed by Rong Lei. You're in pain. You'd rather die than live. But when you heard Dad like that, did you think about the relationship between husband and wife? She did not need to ask. She already knew the truth. It was Zhao Ku. Everything was planned by Zhao Ku. Zhou Meilin was just carrying the false reputation. But this is also the punishment she deserved. Pei Chi took a step back. Pei Chi, it was that bastard who framed me. Zhou Meilin fell to the ground and shouted hoarsely, I want to kill that bitch Zhao Ku. She looked up at Pei Chi and grabbed the barbed wire again. You'll help me, won't you? Pei Chi laughed coldly. Auntie, no one can help you. Don't you think you deserve this? That's what you deserve. Zhou Meilin was stunned. Her old face was covered in tears. Pei Chi turned around and walked towards the door. She paused for a moment. From the day you gave me to Mr. Zhou, from the moment I stepped into Tang Yu's room, you were wrong. After she finished speaking, she quickly left the dark place. Zhou Meilin's cries could be heard behind her as she walked further and further away. When she went out and breathed in the fresh air, her nose still seemed to be filled with the smell of decay. He could almost hear Zhou Meilin crying. Pei Chi leaned against the car door and let out a long sigh. She took out 3 cigarettes from the car, lit them, and stuck them into the dirt. She squatted in the direction of Pei Mingyi's grave and murmured, Dad, Zhou Meilin got what she deserved. After that, it was Zhao Ku's turn. She harmed Jinrong and killed Lin Yun's child. The law was too light to punish her. Pei Chi knew how to make Zhao Ku feel worse. Losing the title of Mrs. Tang would probably make Zhao Ku feel worse than death. Pei Chi closed her eyes. Just like Zhao Ku said, they were not destined to be mother and daughter in this life. They were destined to be enemies. After a while, the prison warden suddenly walked out. Seeing that Pei Chi was still there, he sighed in relief and said, Zhou Meilin has gone crazy. Pei Chi was stunned. She looked down and said, I'll pay for her medical expenses. Take good care of her. She took out a card and handed it to the prison warden. Call me if it's not enough. She wanted Zhou Meilin to live because her dad didn't want to see her. Chapter 359. It was already night time when Pei Chi returned to the city. It was the 4th day of the first lunar month, and the streets were busier than usual. Pedestrians walked to and fro, making her look even more lonely. While waiting for the traffic lights, young men and women would occasionally point at her car and laugh. As more and more people laughed, Pei-Chi-Chi remembered that this car had been criticized badly. She thought that she would take the company's car to the hotel tomorrow. This car really didn't look good. Later, she went to the Pei Corporation's building. There was only one security guard on duty during the new year. When he saw Pei-Chi-Chi, he quickly stood up. "Boss Pei." Pei-Chi-Chi smiled faintly. "I'm just here to take a look." "Do what you need to do." The security guard hesitated for a moment before asking carefully, "Boss Pei, are you really moving the company away?" Pei-Chi-Chi smiled faintly. "That's right. Actually, given Pei Corporation's current situation, we don't need such an expensive place." How could she not know that if she sold this piece of land, she would probably not be able to buy it back? However, she needed the money. The shareholders of Pei Corporation had been surging in secret. Her father only had 38% of the shares. If one day, these people waited for an opportunity to make a move, she would really be powerless. Instead of waiting for that day, she might as well start and make use of their greed. Pei-Chi-Chi knew that this was cutting her own flesh, but she had no other choice. The security guard did not say anything else. He followed his duty and let Pei-Chi-Chi walk in. Pei Corporation was not big. It seemed to have a few hundred employees and occupied a separate building. There was also a staff rest area. Added together, it was not big or small. However, in the center of B City, it was really considered very expensive. She walked to the office and sat in the place where she had been sitting for a long time. After a long time, she finally packed up her things, not only her things, but also Pei Mingyi's things. When she left, she stood at the door with a layer of tears in her eyes, and slowly closed the door. When the lights were on, she carried the paper box and put it in the car. She actually felt like she did not know where to go. The phone beside her rang. She looked down and saw that it was Little One. "Boss Pei, don't forget to go to the Pearl Hotel tomorrow night. I went to confirm again today. The venue has been set up. I've hired a slightly famous host, but it's a little expensive." Little One felt that it was quite a pity. Old Mr. Pei had been reluctant to sell this piece of land back when he was around. Now that Boss Pei was here, he would not have reached this stage if it had not been too difficult. Pei-Chi-Chi acknowledged. "Thank you, Little One." "Why are you thanking me?" "I'm Boss Pei's secretary. These are my duties. What's more, I'm getting paid overtime," Little One said sincerely. She felt that Pei-Chi-Chi was actually a good boss. Compared to old Mr. Pei, he might not be as easy to talk to, but he gave her a glimmer of hope. Of course, there was still a long way to go. It wasn't something that could be accomplished in a short period of time. She thought about it and said, "Even if the company moves, I'll still be your secretary. I'm alone anyway, so I can go anywhere." Pei-Chi-Chi smiled faintly. "Okay. See you tomorrow." "That's right, I've already prepared the gown. You can just change in the lounge," Little One added as she recalled something. Pei-Chi-Chi sighed in her heart. She actually had to wear an evening gown to sell her family's inheritance. Chapter 360. In the lounge of Mingzhu Hotel, Pei-Chi-Chi looked at herself in the mirror, a little stunned. She was selling land, but now it seemed like she was showing off her looks. She did not know that Little One had prepared such an outfit for her. It was a black knee-length dress, and the style was so simple that it couldn't be any simpler. There was a hollowed-out square collar, and the front was not too revealing. The back only revealed her shoulder blades, and the skirt was knee-length. However, the two tender lotus root-like arms, the neck, and the large snow-white skin on her back were all smooth and charming under the light. Fortunately, her long black hair was draped over her back, blocking some of the bright colors. However, those two tender legs challenged a man's self-control, making one's imagination run wild just by looking at them. Her entire appearance could only be described with one word: fragrant, soft, and creamy. Little One was also stunned. She had always known that Pei-Chi-Chi was very beautiful, but when she wore such a gown, she could actually be so beautiful. She was fantasizing in her heart. In the past, when Mr. Tang faced Boss Pei and both of them were lying on the same bed, did he still need to sleep? Little Wen's fingers couldn't help but touch it. Wow, it felt so good. Pei-Chi-Chi only had light makeup on her face. Her long eyelashes were dense and curled like midnight, and her red lips were a natural lip color as if they were moisturized. They were so fragrant and soft that one wanted to eat them up in one bite. Little One thought in her heart that Boss Pei would probably be worth more than that piece of land if he stood out like that. However, she didn't dare to say that out loud. Pei-Chi-Chi looked at her and said lightly, "Let's go." Little One was also wearing a small black gown, and she was a little restrained. She pulled her clothes and followed Pei-Chi-Chi out. Of course, they weren't fighting alone. A few of the young middle-level members of the Pei Corporation were also pulled over to strengthen their aura. When they walked into the auction hall, the lights were a little dim, but one could still see that the decorations were quite meticulous. The organizers like to play these games. I heard that this is based on psychology. In such an environment, the hormones in the kidneys will rise rapidly. If you're not careful, you'll raise the sign. Xiaowen lowered her voice and whispered into Pei-Chi-Chi's ear. Pei-Chi-Chi glanced at her. Is the hormone for this? Xiaowen laughed dryly, more or less. More or less. The two of them sat down in their seats. At this time, almost everyone had arrived. The lights were dim, so not many people noticed Pei-Chi-Chi. But who was this host? How could a very good host in B City let go of the auction house? First, he said something funny and then instructed the lights to look for Pei-Chi-Chi. Let's see where the beautiful Boss Pei is. Please cooperate with the lights. Pei-Chi-Chi felt a little uncomfortable sitting there. The handsome male host had already started speaking. Now, let's welcome Boss Pei on stage to make a beautiful opening for tonight's auction. There was a round of applause, and then the host personally came down. He reached his hand out to Pei-Chi-Chi, acting like a gentleman. Pei-Chi-Chi didn't want to brush him off. She had no choice but to put her hand on his wrist and walk up to the stage together. The lights were bright enough. She stood there, glowing white and soul-stirring. Then, the host said the same thing that Little One was thinking. If I didn't know that the land on Shangxian Road was being auctioned today, I would have thought that the beautiful Boss Pei would be auctioned tonight. Chapter 361. There was an uproar. If the big shots from all walks of life did not care about their identities, they would have whistled like hooligans and called for weapons to auction Pei-Chi-Chi. Pei-Chi-Chi forced a smile. Mr. Meng, you really know how to joke. I never joke with beauties, especially top beauties like Boss Pei. Host Meng was also a professional. He stopped after livening up the atmosphere. If he was really like a lecher, no one would dare to ask him to host in the future. He cleared his throat and then looked down. Everyone here is the god of wealth of City B. I'll thank you on behalf of Boss Pei. Of course, this thank you is a little expensive. After all, everyone knows the value of this land and building in the business district of City B. Pausing for a moment, he continued, according to the base price quoted by the Pei family enterprise, it is 3.5 billion. I personally think that this price is very fair. We all know that a few days ago, the main residents auctioned off 534 plots of land. The area of the plot is similar to this one, but everyone here is clear about the terrain. That plot of land was sold for a sky-high price of 7.8 billion. Therefore, the outcome of today's auction will depend on how diligently you all raise your placards. He gestured for Pei Chi to crack an egg. Pei Chi looked down, smiled, and gently cracked it. The stakes are very good. Let's auction it now. Host Meng smiled at Pei Chi. Boss Pei, are you going to fight with me or watch from below? Pei Chi took the microphone and smiled slightly. Before she could speak, the host leaned over and said quickly with a smile, "Believe me, if Boss Pei stands on top, the price will be at least 20% higher." Host Meng had been in various major auctions for a long time and naturally knew the nature of this. Pei Chi was in a dilemma. Host Meng simply held her hand. "Boss Pei will host with me tonight then. I'll do my best first, and Boss Pei will pay after." Pei Chi's face was a little red after accidentally saying such a dirty joke. However, she still pretended to be calm. "Are you talking about the commission?" Host Meng sighed. "It's good that Boss Pei left me some remembrance, but I might not have the chance. It all depends on the biggest bidder today." He stared at the gods of fortune below with a burning gaze. "Is there anyone who wants to bid 3.5 billion? Soon, someone raised a sign. 3.6 billion. 3.7 billion. 3.8 billion. Very good. Over here, Evergrande CEO has raised the bid to 4 billion. Is he thinking of developing your real estate project?" After the host finished speaking, he called out to the other side, 4.5 billion, Chief Lin is so generous. On this side, it's already 5 billion yuan. The situation is very good. Should we let Boss Pei express something now? Would you like to thank the host for his hard work? Pei Chi had no choice but to hug him gently. With this hug, the number below rose to 6 billion. 7 billion. 8 billion. When it reached 10 billion, the momentum slowed down and the price increased by 100 million. Although that piece of land was very good, no one wanted to be a spendthrift. When the bid reached 11 billion, there was a feeling of exhaustion. In fact, this was already a very high price. Host Meng gave Pei Chi a look, meaning to stop while they were ahead. What's more, the boss who bid this round was quite credible. Pei Chi nodded slightly. Chapter 362. That voice. Pei Chi was stunned for a moment. She turned her head and saw Tang Yu. She was very far away from him, but she saw him at a glance. He was just standing there, but he was already very elegant. Tang Yu was followed by Meng Qingqing and Xiao Ran. They were all dressed like elites. Host Meng let out a long sigh and turned his head to ask in a low voice, "Mr. Tang, are you here to bid or to challenge us?" He asked this because the matter of these two had been circulating in the upper class of B City for a long time, so he had to be on guard. "I don't know either." Pei Chi knew that the organizers had sent an invitation to Tang Yu, but she didn't expect him to come. He had Sun Feifei, so shouldn't he avoid arousing suspicion? Host Meng's eyes were filled with confusion. He braced himself and continued, "Mr. Tang has caught the last chance." He laughed dryly and gestured for the three of them to sit in the VIP seats. Tang Yu sat down and his gaze fell on Pei Chi. His deep and dark eyes immediately narrowed. She was dressed like this on stage for people to see. Was this auction for the land or her beauty? He was a little angry in his heart, but his face was very cold. He had always been noble. He only unbuttoned 2 buttons and sat down leisurely. Xiao Ran's voice rang beside his ear. The bid just reached 11 billion. Tang Yu moved his chin. Xiao Ran immediately cleared his throat. 12 billion. Probably because President Yang was a little unwilling just now, he quickly retorted, 13 billion. Tang Yu frowned, but Xiao Ran understood him well. With just a frown, he directly called 15 billion. This time, no one would dare to compete with Xing Yuan. But President Yang was still unyielding. 16 billion. Tang Yu pulled his lower lip and smiled coldly. He personally raised his finger and said in an elegant voice, 18 billion. 20 billion. Mr. Yang knew about Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi's past. He also knew that Tang Yu was determined to win today. Since he couldn't get the land, he might as well be a good person for once. But in the heat of the moment, he became a good person. But, who was Tang Yu? How could they allow themselves to be manipulated by him? Just as Xiao Ran was about to raise his hand, he calmly said, no need. Congratulations, Mr. Yang. With that, Tang Yu stood up, buttoned his shirt, and smiled mockingly. How could these little tricks fool him? He didn't mind spending money on her, but if it was someone else, offering Buddha with borrowed flowers, he might not be happy. Congratulations to Mr. Yang. Director Yang was stunned. Director Yang was dumbfounded. Director Yang was at a loss. Wasn't it obvious that Mr. Tang was determined to win? She was just the icing on the cake. How did it become a congratulation now? 20 billion. This was an international joke. Mr. Yang's forehead was full of sweat. He wiped it off and his expression was also very awkward. Host Meng was also stunned. Mr. Tang was going to withdraw. Wasn't he here for the beauty? What should he do? It looked like President Yang wasn't going to bid. The contract wasn't signed either. Wouldn't it be a failure? Let him cry for his commission. Pei Chi-Chi looked at Tang Yu. How could she not know that he was deliberately making things difficult for her? She didn't expect President Yang to deliberately raise the price for her. Now, she was in a dilemma. She naturally wouldn't make things difficult for President Yang, but President Yang was going to lose face. Chapter 363. As Tang Yu spoke, he walked out slowly, followed by Meng Qingqing and Xiao Ran. Meng Qingqing and Xiao Ran were both surprised. One had to know that as long as the boss participated in the auction, it would never be a failure. Today, he was purposely here to ruin Pei Xiaoqi's place. Abbot Meng, who had been ruined, immediately walked down the stage and caught up with Tang Yu. Mr. Tang, may I have a word with you? He was so smart that he could tell at a glance that Boss Yang had fallen into a trap. Of course, the biggest loss was Boss Pei. At most, Boss Yang would be laughed at for a while, but it would be difficult for Boss Pei's land to be auctioned at a good price. Tang Yu had already walked to the door. He turned around when he heard that. Even in the dim light, his aura was still magnificent and incomparably noble. He pursed his thin lips and looked at the young abbot. He did not avoid the people present and chuckled. If you want to have a word with me, why don't you ask Boss Pei to come over? He did not look at Pei Chi-Chi when he spoke, but his meaning was obvious. He was coming for her. The atmosphere became a little warm. Everyone knew about the history between Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi. They did not know how this pair of enemies ended up like this, but the only thing they were sure of was, Boss Tang could not let it go. It was either love or hate. Pei Chi-Chi stood on the stage alone, unable to step down. Seeing that there was room for negotiation, Abbot Meng winked at her fiercely. Young lady, even if you don't care about yourself, you have to care about my commission. You can't do it for free. And Boss Yang, say something. Pei Chi-Chi stood there, her gaze falling on Tang Yu's face. She could not read his emotions. At that moment, he was incomparably cold as if everything around him had nothing to do with him. Her heart ached, and she felt a sense of longing. She was extremely conflicted after being separated from him. Every time he approached her, she felt pain and joy. She missed him, she wanted to see him, but when she did, she was afraid. She was afraid that this would be the last time, and she was afraid that she would not be able to control herself. This kind of emotion had been tormenting her. At last she slowly stepped down from the stage and walked up to him in her dress, a step away from him. Meng Qingqing and Xiao Ran took a few steps back to give them space to talk. Pei Qiqi looked up at Tang Yu and asked in a hoarse voice, "What do you want?" Tang Yu looked into her eyes and saw her pretending to be calm. He chuckled. "Boss Pei, you want to know?" Before she could open her mouth, he caught her arm, and the world spun around her. Her back was pressed against the door behind her, and his body was pressed against hers. Her arms were pinned to the sides by him. It was an embarrassing position, but his body was blocking her. Others only knew that she had been hit by the door, but nothing was revealed. "What do I want?" "Boss Pei, I really want to know." "What do you want?" His body was pressed against hers so tightly that she could feel the changes in his body. Just like that, with his beastly desire, he pressed her. "Sell the company, run to the ends of the earth, and never see me again, right?" Pei Qiqi looked up and bit her lip, unable to say a word. "Pei Qiqi, right?" He pressed against her, and his elegant face looked like it was about to storm. She was stunned. Chapter 364. Pei Qiqi closed her eyes. "Yes." He stretched out a finger and gently stroked her red lips. The smile on his face froze. "Boss Pei, you really dare to say that?" "I've always been honest." She opened her eyes and looked at him without fear. She had already experienced the worst situation. What could be worse? Tang Yu's fingers were still slowly caressing her red lips. That little face, which was as fresh as a painting, was now filled with stubbornness. She was as beautiful as an oil painting. She was so beautiful that it made him want to kill her. "Boss Pei, you've used all your honesty on me, haven't you?" As he spoke, he sneered and took a step back to look at her. "Boss Pei, I can buy this piece of land for 21 billion. That 100 million, you're mine tonight." She opened her eyes and looked at him in shock. He wanted to spend 100 million to buy her for one night. All of a sudden, all of the embarrassment, all of the anger, surged up. What did he think she was? He gave her freedom. He got together with Sun Feifei. Now, he wanted to spend 100 million to buy her for one night. They were very close to each other, and the light was so dim. She suspected that the lights on this side had been turned off on purpose. It was almost impossible to see them clearly. Under the cover of the darkness, she kicked hard with her high heels. Don't even think about it. Her kick was very accurate. She kicked right at Tang Yu's area. She was stunned. So was he. Just as she was about to run away, his hand suddenly grabbed her weapon. Holding it in his hand, his body pressed her behind the door again. He narrowed his eyes at her. "Boss Pei, you have two choices. One is to massage that area for me tonight. Two is..." Her chest heaved violently. She didn't know what he would do. Tang Yu looked at her fearful face and smiled coldly. "Two is, I will ask someone to turn on all the lights here. You will help me massage the area that hurt me just now." Pei Qiqi was furious. She wanted to kick him again with her leg that he was holding. However, she couldn't move because he was holding it. "Boss Pei, do you think you can get your way again?" His voice was low and strangely hoarse. It was the way he looked when he was staring. Pei Qiqi was embarrassed and angry. Under such circumstances, he was actually staring at her. Of course, she knew that accompanying him for a night wasn't just for a meal, a cup of tea, or a chat. She longed for him, longed for his body, but was also extremely afraid, but she was even more afraid of what he would do to her in public. She closed her eyes and heard herself saying, "Okay, then." She was put down. Her body went limp, and she almost slipped. Tang Yu raised his finger. 1 billion. His words caused an uproar. Everyone wanted to know what Boss Pei had whispered to make Boss Tang change his mind. Abbot Meng was shocked. Director Yang's heart was at ease. "Congratulations, Mr. Tang." The little abbot was afraid that a long delay would cause trouble. He quickly finalized the deal. He wanted to cozy up to Tang Yu, but Tang Yu whispered to Meng Qingqing. "Qingqing, stay behind to handle the paperwork." With that, he grabbed Pei Chi-Chi's arm and dragged her out of the door. The place was still silent. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Chapter 365. Tang Yu grabbed Pei Chi-Chi and stepped into the elevator. Her wrist was hurting from his grip. When there was no one around, she flung his hand off forcefully. "Tang Yu, what exactly do you want?" He leaned against the wall of the elevator and looked at her coldly. "I want that piece of land and your body." He spoke plainly, and then he took a cigarette out of his pocket, bent over it, and took a long drag on it. He needed to calm down so that he wouldn't strangle her to death. He knew that she was auctioning off the company's property and that she wanted to move the company. He could understand her situation in the Pei Group. Without his protection, she wouldn't be able to hold on for long with her abilities. She could only kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. Actually, he was surprised that she would do such a thing. And agreed. This was a good idea. Now that their relationship was at its lowest, those people in the Pei Group were just watching and hesitating. If they could get a sum of money now, why wouldn't they do it? She had actually thought of it. Tang Yu looked at her. Young and beautiful. All the compliments could be used to describe her. But she was too cruel to him. Pei Chi-Chi's back was pressed against the cold wall of the elevator. She bit her lips and looked at his inscrutable expression. He was just looking at her like that, and her body started to heat up shamefully. Those lingering memories flashed through her mind like a rewind. She stared at his thin lips with her midnight eyes. It was so shameful. Because he was someone else's man now. She thought of the box of t-shirts that he had left at her house. She didn't know why, but a sentence came out of her mouth naturally. "Your things were left at my house." He was still smoking. He replied faintly, as though he didn't care. Pei Chi-Chi's face heated up and she didn't continue. Instead, she asked like a kitten, "Where to? Are you afraid?" He looked at her. His voice was still cold, completely different from the rascal at her house. She turned her face away and didn't say anything. At this moment, the elevator arrived. He walked out with Pei Chi-Chi following behind. Parked at the entrance was a black Jaguar, a very low-profile car. Tang Yu opened the car door and got in. His slender fingers were on the steering wheel, waiting for her. Pei Chi-Chi walked to the other side and sat in his car with her head hung low. She thought he would find a presidential suite and humiliate her to his heart's content, doing all those things to her. But she didn't expect him to drive back to the Rose Garden. When the sports car passed through the black carved gate, all the lights in the villa were turned on. The trees were all equipped with small silver lights, and the entire garden looked like it was filled with fireworks. Pei Chi-Chi opened the car door, and in front of her, water sprayed out from the music fountain, accompanied by a serenade. She stood there, a little stunned and a little overwhelmed by the favor. Tang Yu closed the car door and quietly observed the expression on her face. Then, he stood beside her and looked at everything around them. Do all girls like it? Pei Chi hadn't woken up yet, so she nodded. Tang Yu smiled faintly. Fei Fei likes it too. Pei Chi was stunned, and her face was drained of blood. He was still smiling faintly, looking like he was in a good mood. Then, he said lightly, let's go in and eat. I haven't eaten anything all night. Pei Chi turned around and looked at his back view. Chapter 366. Pei Chi hurriedly followed him. Tang Yu walked into the living room and took off his coat. He passed it to the maid and instructed, dinner is ready. The maid bowed. Yes, sir. She then looked at Pei Chi and said gently, hello, Mississippi. Tang Yu did not say anything and only gestured for Pei Chi to follow him. She was actually cold. She did not take out her coat in the hotel, so she did not feel cold in the car. However, she felt chilly the moment she got out of the car. The warmth of the living room soothed her. She let go of her arms and sat beside him quietly. The dining room was very big. The dining table was made of silver cutlery and there was a silver candlestick in the middle. The dishes were Chinese, the kind that Pei Chi was used to. Tang Yu did not talk much when he was eating. He quickly finished his dinner and leaned against the back of the chair, smoking and waiting for her quietly. Pei Chi bent over like a little kitten eating. She could feel that he was in a good mood. After she was done eating, he would probably eat her. Tang Yu did not rush her. He just smoked and looked very patient. Finally, she was full and looked up at him. Wait for me in the bedroom upstairs, he said briefly. He then got up and walked upstairs. Pei Chi got up. Her legs felt a little weak, but she still walked upstairs slowly. Everything here was luxurious and dreamy. Even the handrails of the stairs were made of crystal. There were a few rooms upstairs. Based on her intuition, she pushed open the room on the east side. It was a European-style bed with ivory furniture and a light blue round bed curtain. Under the crystal lights, the carpet was white and spotless. The light blue floor-to-ceiling curtain swayed gently with the night breeze. Pei Chi pursed her lips, kicked off her shoes and walked over barefoot. She opened the window and saw a large red rose garden. There were countless night lights on the foundation. Under those night lights, she could almost see the roses clearly. They were so fragrant that it seemed as if they could emit fragrance. At the door, two little maids came in with flower baskets and said in a low voice, Miss, Sir ordered you to take a bath first. Pei Chi turned around and watched as they spread the rose petals on the pure white bed before bowing and leaving. She bit her lip. What was he doing? Shouldn't he be doing this to Sun Fei Fei? Suddenly, an idea came to her mind and she stopped the little maid. What's the date today? The little maid lowered her eyebrows and looked up. Miss, today is the 14th. Number 14. Valentine's Day. Pei Chi was stunned, and her breathing became chaotic. She was a little scared, extremely scared. She ran towards the door. She couldn't stay. Her intuition told her that he didn't want just one night. However, she bumped into Tang Yu at the door. She bumped into a wall of people. He held her shoulders. What happened? Pei Chi lowered her head and didn't speak for a long time. After a long time, she softly said, Tang Yu, let me go. If today's date made you misunderstand, then you don't have to. He walked to the front of the bed and lay down, patting the place beside him. I just wanted to have some fun. She turned her head and looked at him. Suddenly, she saw a box of t-shirts on the bedside table. It was the same as the one he left at her house, and it was unopened. Pei Chi looked at it and felt a little shameful pleasure. He hadn't used this on Sun Fei Fei yet. Come here. His voice was hoarse, revealing a touch of unquestionable jade. Chapter 367. Pei Chi walked over slowly and half knelt beside him. Tang Yu looked at her quietly. "Help me unbutton my shirt." She raised her hand and went to serve him. Her little hands unbuttoned his shirt. She wasn't used to doing this, so her movements were a little clumsy. He didn't mind. He held a cigarette in one hand but didn't light it up. He lowered his head and looked at her little face. Finally, she unbuttoned his shirt. He said hoarsely, "Continue." Pei Chi didn't move. She just knelt there, looking up and struggling hopelessly like a young animal. "I don't want to." But she had no choice. He grabbed her little hand forcefully and placed it on his belt. He was firm and forceful, not allowing her to reject him. In this hopeless resistance, she finally let go of everything she had and laid down on those flower petals. She was fair and beautiful. Tang Yu wasn't a saint. He wouldn't reject such temptation. Moreover, she was his tonight. With a tinge of anger and a surging desire, he had taken her for an entire night. Amidst the chaos, he pressed against her and growled in her ear, "Pei Chi, you liar." But she had already fainted and lost consciousness. She didn't know what he said at all. Deep in the night. Deep in the night, by the time Tang Yu let go of her, it was almost 2 in the morning. He went into the bathroom, took a shower, and cleaned up briefly for her. Wearing a bathrobe, he sat on the bed. Pei Chi was sleeping soundly. Her little hands were hugging his pillow as though it was a habit. He looked at her silently for a while and stuffed the pillow into her arms. Pei Chi rubbed her little face against it and murmured, "Tang Yu." His originally indifferent face became a little gentle. His slender fingers pinched her little face. "Little liar, I'll teach you a lesson like this next time." Actually, he knew very well that he was just finding an excuse to do it with her. He couldn't always get her drunk. It was just a little expensive. After sitting for a while, he walked out and went to the study. Meng Qingqing was there. When he saw Tang Yu enter, he first checked. Sure enough, he saw that his neck was full of hickeys. He asked mockingly, "Did Pei Xiaoqi or Sun Feifei leave these?" Tang Yu glanced at him and sat down. "What did you find?" Meng Qingqing stopped joking around and said seriously, "Quite a few." He pulled out a photograph. "Look at this." Tang Yu took it, squinted his eyes, and saw a picture. The woman above was Zhao Ku. As for that man, this man is called Rong Lei. Meng Qingqing lightly said, "You shouldn't be unfamiliar with this name. He is Zhou Meilin's pretty boy." I didn't think that he would have this kind of relationship with Zhao Ku. Tang Yu was still holding the photo. After looking at it for a while, he said, "Where did this photo come from?" Pei Xiaoqi went to the hotel and the news agency. He must have bought it from them, but no matter how my men asked, the news agency kept their mouths shut and wouldn't say a word. Meng Qingqing continued, "Yesterday, he went to see Zhou Meilin, and then Zhou Meilin went crazy. That's where he got this photo from." With that said, he looked at Tang Yu. "Don't you think this is very strange? Why would Pei Xiaoqi investigate Zhao Ku for no reason? She suspects that the pretty boy was behind what happened to Jinrong." Although that was what he said, Tang Yu had other thoughts in his mind. Chapter 368. Tang Yu gripped the photo tightly. "Qingqing, you don't have to investigate this matter anymore." Meng Qingqing nodded. "All right then, I won't ask too much about your matters." They were both smart people and they knew that it was best not to interfere. Meng Qingqing left quickly. Tang Yu sat in the study for a long time and smoked half a pack of cigarettes. It was only when the sky was getting brighter that he opened his eyes and looked at the boundless sky outside. Finally, he made a call. When he returned to the bedroom, Pei Chi was still sound asleep. Her hair was pillowed on the pillow and her fair arms were stretched out of the blanket. Only half of her face could be seen. He walked over and sat down with a heavy heart. His fingers touched her face gently. Chi-Chi, is it what I think it is? Is that why you want to leave me? Is that why you won't marry me? How much do you know? Her face was warm and her mouth was slightly open. Her breath was also sweet. Tang Yu's fingers wandered around her face. He reached out and plucked a strand of her hair. It was a little hot in his palm. He closed his eyes and walked to the changing room to change his clothes before driving out. It was early in the morning and the air was still very thin. He drove for about half an hour before he realized that it was a little early. He parked the car by the roadside and smoked a few cigarettes. His lungs were a little sore from all the smoking before he extinguished the engine. He rested his elbow on the car window and frowned. He took out his phone and called Tang Axian. Tang Axian was very happy when she received his call. She had been bored to death for the past few days. Her parents were always quarreling and they even had to fight. She had been living with her tail between her legs. Brother. Tang Axian's voice was very sweet. You're the one who called me. Tang Yu's voice was a little hoarse but gentle. Have you had breakfast? I'll take you out for breakfast. Tang Axian immediately asked, are we going to Chi-Chi's place? Tang Yu thought of the woman who was still sleeping on his bed. He said lightly, no, we're eating out. Tang Axian was a little disinterested. It's not Chi-Chi's place. I don't want to go either. You only have Chi-Chi in your heart, and you don't have me as your brother anymore. Tang Yu showed some authority. Tang Axian had a place for him in her heart, so she said flatteringly, of course. All right, I'll accompany you to breakfast. As she spoke, she did not forget to add, actually, if you're really lonely, you can look for Sun Feifei, your little sweetheart. My heart was eaten by a dog. He said without expression. Pei Chi-Chi was that dog. Tang Axian exclaimed, then whose heart is that in Big Brother's tummy right now? Is it a dog? Tang Yu said the location with a dark face and then hung up the phone. This girl was getting more and more crafty. He looked up at the morning light in front of him and pursed his thin lips. Half an hour later, Tang Yu and Tang Yu sat together in a Hong Kong-style breakfast restaurant. Tang Yu ordered about 10 kinds of snacks and a bowl of nourishing porridge for her. Tang Axian was extremely satisfied with the food. She looked at Tang Yu sitting there smoking. Her mouth was full and she could not speak clearly anymore. Big brother, why aren't you eating? Tang Yu put out the cigarette. I've eaten. Tang Axian smiled mischievously. You must have missed me. He looked at her with a stern expression on his face. Tang Axian was finally full. She looked at him eagerly. Smile, it's rare to see you. Seeing her like this, Tang Yu's heart softened and he smiled faintly. Chapter 369. Tang Yu reached out and touched her hair. He narrowed his eyes and pulled out a strand of hair. Tang Axian felt a pain in her heart. She looked up at him suspiciously, but Tang Yu had already clenched his fists. What's wrong? Tang Axian frowned. I think my hair was pulled just now. Maybe it got caught somewhere. Tang Yu smiled and rubbed her scalp. How about now? Are you feeling better? Does it still hurt? Much better. She looked at him and smiled sweetly. She reached out and hugged him again. Brother, can you take me to Chi-Chi? Tang Yu coughed. I might not be able to. I have something to do later. Then I'll go by myself. The driver is here. I'll just go for a while. Tang Axian clung to him. Tang Yu looked at his sister. Chi-Chi is sleeping. She might wake up in the afternoon. Tang Xian's jaw dropped. It was almost 10 o'clock and Chi-Chi was still sleeping. How did her brother know that she was sleeping? Then, where is Chi-Chi sleeping? Tang Xian swallowed hard. She recalled the phone call that night. Her brother and Chi-Chi's voices in the back seat of the car. Her face was a little red. Tang Yu didn't know that the little girl had eavesdropped on him. He paused for a moment and softened. Let the driver take you to the rose garden. I have something to do. I'll be back in the afternoon. Tang Xian was happy for a moment. But she soon looked at Tang Yu suspiciously. Brother, don't you have Sun Feifei? Tang Yu glared at her. Tang Xian didn't dare to say anything else. Anyway, she thought that her brother liked Chi-Chi. As for other things, she couldn't care less. She didn't dare to care. But her brother was really two-faced. Tang Yu sent Tang Xian to the car. He gave the driver some instructions before closing the door for her. He watched the car drive out of his sight before sitting in his own car. He stretched out his hand and placed Tang Xian's hair into a transparent plastic bag. There were two other plastic bags there, one containing Pei Chi-Chi's hair, and his own hair. Tang Yu watched for a long time before starting the car. The white sports car drove into a private hospital. He got off the car and walked to the second floor of a small building. The doctor who received him was none other than Director He. Mr. Tang. Dean. He was drenched in cold sweat. He did not know why Tang Yu had come. I need to do a few DNA comparisons, Tang Yu said lightly. DNA. The Dean was a little surprised. He looked at Tang Yu with a meaningful gaze. Could it be that one of the women is pregnant with Mr. Tang's child? Tang Yu only glanced at her, and He did not dare to say another word. He took the 3 small bags, which were labeled with a serial number. Don't get it wrong. Tang Yu sat on the sofa. How long will it take? He looked at Tang Yu. All 3. Tang Yu looked at him calmly. How long will it take? Normally, it will take a week. But for Mr. Tang, 3 days should be enough. He wiped the sweat off his forehead. Tang Yu pursed his lips. Mr. Tang, I really can't go any lower than this. I also want it to be done as soon as possible. He broke out in cold sweat. Tang Yu looked at him for a long time before saying, all right, 3 days it is. He paused for a while, but he did not show any intention of leaving. He was stunned. Don't worry, Mr. Tang. No one else will know about this. Tang Yu did not say anything and walked out of the building. Chapter 370. Tang Yu got out of the car and closed the door. He looked at Tang Xian and Pei Chi-Chi sitting on the sofa, seemingly reading a magazine. Their faces were very, very close, so close that he could easily compare their features. How could he not have noticed that Tang Xian and Pei Chi-Chi's faces were similar to each other? But even now, he did not think that Pei Chi-Chi and Zhao Ku looked alike. Zhao Ku's face had long been tainted by lust, so how could it be the same as Chi-Chi's and Tang Xian's beautiful faces? As for Tang Xian, even if she had a mother like Zhao Ku, Tang Xian was sick from a young age. Moreover, she was his biological sister, so Tang Yu had never had any other thoughts about her. Of course, he loved her, but he still kept it to himself. Pei Chi-Chi. If she was Zhao Ku's daughter. Tang Yu let out a long sigh. He had not thought about it yet. He clearly remembered that year, when he lay beside his mother and reached out to touch her lower abdomen. Lin Yun said gently that it should be a baby girl. From then on, he knew that he would have a sister. Until one day, he saw his mother covered in blood. His sister was gone. After that, Zhao Ku gave birth to Tang Xian. He actually hated that child, but when he saw Tang Axayan, who was as weak as a mouse, he could not bear to see her like that. His feelings towards Chi-Chi were even more complicated than Tang Axayan's. This was not just a matter of whether he loved her or not. He wanted to marry her, and he wanted to be with his mother every day. He closed his eyes to hide the complicated feelings in them. Pei Chi-Chi looked up and saw Tang Yu. Her body froze. Tang Axayan looked at her and said softly, "Chi-Chi, are you afraid of me?" Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips. "I'm not." "If you're not, why don't you dare to look at me?" Tang Axayan raised a brow, looking a little mischievous. Pei Chi-Chi glared at her and got up. "I'll go back first." She was wearing the clothes that Tang Yu had prepared for her. She stood up and was about to leave. Tang Axayan wanted to ask him to stay, but seeing that her brother didn't say anything, she didn't dare to make a sound. When Pei Chi-Chi passed by Tang Yu, he suddenly reached out to stop her. She lifted her eyes and stared at him silently. Everything that happened last night was like fireworks set off in the middle of the night, disappearing in the blink of an eye. She didn't forget their current relationship, it was just that there was nothing between them. "I'll send you back." He didn't forget that she didn't have any money with her, and she left her bag in the hotel. Pei Chi-Chi didn't refuse. "Send me to Little Wen's place. I'll get the key." Tang Yu turned around and walked out with Pei Chi-Chi following behind him. Tang Axayan looked on helplessly. Her eyes were burning. What was going on? How could he just leave her here like this? Tang Yu drove the same car as last night. Pei Chi-Chi sat down and didn't make a sound. When she woke up early in the morning, he was no longer in bed. Tang Axayan came in a while later. She wanted to leave a long time ago, but Tang Axayan kept pestering her. Now that she was sitting beside him, she could feel that he was exuding a cold aura. He was like a completely different person from the man who crazily wanted her last night. "Address," he said coldly as he held the steering wheel. Pei Chi-Chi tilted her head. 21 Huanghai Road. He didn't make a sound and started the car. Along the way, the car drove at a high speed. Pei Chi-Chi's little face slowly turned pale. She slept late last night, so she felt a little carsick. She felt terrible and held on to the armrest tightly. He finally slowed down the car when he sensed that something was wrong with her, but he didn't stop. Chapter 371. What? Pei Chi-Chi turned her head to look at his handsome face, but he was looking straight ahead. After a long time, he replied, "Why didn't you tell me if you weren't feeling well?" She pursed her lips and smiled. "That's not important." The car came to a sudden stop. Tang Yu narrowed his eyes and stared at her. Pei Chi-Chi's heart sank. He asked with a gloomy face, "Miss Pei, what's important in your heart?" She didn't say anything. Her chest was heaving up and down because of her messy breathing. "Jinrong. Even if he wakes up, do you think you can still marry him after sleeping with me for so long?" His voice was mocking. Pei Chi-Chi couldn't stand his words and blurted out, "This has nothing to do with Jinrong." After saying that, her eyes widened slightly. She looked at him just like that, and her breathing became even more messy. "Then who does it have to do with?" He reached out and pinched her chin, not letting her escape. Pei Chi-Chi wanted to move away, but his fingers were slender and strong, and he pinched her so hard that it hurt. Soon, a few faint fingerprints appeared on her chin. She was in so much pain that she almost cried. She looked a little embarrassed. "It has nothing to do with Mr. Tang." "Mr. Tang. When you hugged me and screamed last night, you didn't call me Mr. Tang." He sneered. "You didn't call me Miss Pei last night either." She retorted stubbornly. Tang Yu freed a finger and gently rubbed her red lips. He smiled. "Is that so? She didn't know how to answer. Pei Chi-Chi, how do you want me to call you? Chi-Chi, or... He moved closer to her and pulled her closer to him. Their faces were almost touching. Their eyes met, and when their eyelashes fluttered, they could almost touch each other. Or call me baby, His dark eyes were locked on hers, not letting go of any change in her expression. Pei Chi-Chi's long eyelashes couldn't stop trembling. She didn't dare to look at his eyes, for fear of revealing her thoughts. I didn't. She answered too quickly and deliberately. Tang Yu's fingers continued to caress her lips. Really? Just when she thought he wouldn't let her go, he released her and calmly started the car. After that, he didn't speak to her anymore and drove directly to Xiao Wen's place. Lend me your phone. Pei Chi-Chi lifted her eyes and looked at him. Tang Yu didn't say anything. He just handed the phone to her, opened the car window, lit a cigarette, and put an elbow on the window as he silently smoked. He glanced at her. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and unlocked her phone. Then, she was stunned. The screen was still showing her photo. Her face was a little hot as if she had seen something incredible. She hurriedly lowered her head and dialed Xiao Wen's number. When Little Wen heard her voice, she asked anxiously, Boss Pei, are you all right? I almost called the police. That being said, how dare she? Mr. Tang was the one who took her away. How would she dare to call the police? Pei Chi-Chi's voice was a little soft. I'm fine. I'm downstairs. Can you pass me my bag? Oh, Xiao Wen replied. She immediately realized that this phone number should be Mr. Tang's. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't dare to ask anymore. She took her bag and rushed downstairs. Chapter 372. Little Wen was timid and didn't dare to look into the car. She asked softly, Is Mr. Tang in the car? Pei Chi-Chi nodded and said calmly, You go up first. Little Wen was still worried, but she still went upstairs reluctantly. Pei Chi-Chi watched her enter the elevator before walking to the other side of the car. She bent down and looked at Tang Yu. I'll go back myself. Tang Yu flicked the cigarette ash and glanced at her. He didn't say anything else and drove away. Pei Chi-Chi stood there, looking at the back of the car in a daze. Everything that had happened last night was like a dream. Now that she had woken up, it was time to return to her original position. She gripped her bag tightly, took out her phone, and made a call. Moments later, her brows furrowed slightly, and her fingers tightened on the phone in her hand. Found Rong Lei. Pei Chi-Chi flagged down a taxi, got in, and drove away. But she didn't know that Tang Yu's car had circled around the back street and stopped behind her. Watching her car leave, he dialed a number. Follow her. Let me know immediately if anything happens. After hanging up the phone, his hand slowly slid down to the steering wheel. He leaned back, the sound of his clothes and the leather seat making soft sounds was the only sound in his world. Tang Yu held his forehead with one hand. After a long time, he chuckled softly. Actually, so what if she was? Yes, she was still Pei Chi-Chi. Not someone else. But in his heart, there was a sense of indignation and anger. If she was, he didn't know what he would do to appease her. After a while, he drove back to the rose garden and only sent Tang Xan home at night. Tang Xan sat beside him, careful not to say anything. She felt that her brother was acting weird today and didn't want to say a word. When they arrived at Yanhui, Tang Xan unbuckled her seatbelt and called out like a kitten, Brother. What's wrong? Tang Yu tilted his head and reached out to rub Tang Xan's head. He was a little absent-minded. It had been a long time since he had treated Chi-Chi like this. That girl must be feeling terrible right now. Tang Xian pouted and stared at him. You look so fierce. You're not cute at all. How can a man be cute? He couldn't help but laugh. Then do you like someone like Qingqing? How about I call Qingqing over to accompany you tomorrow? Tang Xian made a face at him. I don't want to. He's the most shameless person in the world. Even though Tang Xian was young, she could feel that Meng Qingqing would always take advantage of her whenever he hugged her like a little sister. Young girls were always sensitive. Qingqing is going to be sad, Tang Yu said with a double meaning. Then, he opened the car door. I'll send you in. Tang Xian was a little surprised and flattered. In the past, her brother would only watch her go in and rarely send her in. The truth was, he didn't want to see her mother. What was going on today? She looked at Tang Yu suspiciously but still went in with him. Tang Yu put his arm around her shoulder and walked in. Zhao Ku and Tang Ziyuan happened to be in the living room. Seeing Tang Xian return, Zhao Ku heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Tang Ziyuan. Tang Ziyuan didn't look at her. He had ignored her for the past few days because of Tang Xian. Chapter 373. Tang Xian stood up straight. My brother brought me out. Zhao Ke smiled and looked at Tang Yu. I've prepared some snacks. Why don't you stay and have some before you leave? She paused and then said softly, Shen Lian happened to be upstairs too. I'll ask her to come down. You haven't seen each other for a long time, right? Tang Xian stuck out her tongue at Tang Yu. It was obvious that her mother was trying to matchmake them. Tang Yu did not say anything and sat down. Zhao Ku was surprised and happy. She spoke to Tang Xian in a much gentler tone. Tang Xian, go upstairs with me and call your sister Shen Lian. Change your clothes before coming down. After that, she smiled at Tang Yu and went upstairs with Tang Xian. Her intention was obvious. She wanted Tang Ziyuan to persuade Tang Yu. When they went upstairs, Tang Ziyuan frowned and looked at his son. Why aren't you sitting? It's like you're in an outsider's house. Tang Yu sat down opposite him. Tang Ziyuan asked the servant to pour him a cup of tea. This is not my house. Tang Yu took a sip of tea and said lightly. Tang Ziyuan couldn't let go of his pride. He looked upstairs and sighed, I know you've hated me for all these years. But so many years have passed, and Tang Xian has grown up. I want to start afresh with your mother, but she might not be willing. He had seen it last time. That Zhao Yi, President Zhao of Xingyuan, had been with him for a long time. He actually wanted his wife. No wonder Zhao Yi refused to marry all these years. Tang Yu chuckled. Do you think it's necessary? All these years, you've experienced more than just Zhao Ku. After remarrying, Tang Ziyuan seemed to have opened a new world. He played with small stars and models one after another. Tang Ziyuan felt a little uncomfortable. That's also because I'm not happy. He sighed. I didn't know how good your mother was in the past. After remarrying, he felt that although Zhao Ku was beautiful, she was too frivolous. He could not satisfy her at all. She had an affair outside, and he couldn't be bothered to deal with her. All these years, they seemed to have a tacit understanding to do their own thing. When they were in a good mood, they would do it. Until her breasts were exposed by her pretty boy. Last time, when Tang Ziyuan saw his ex-wife, she was as gentle as a pearl, untainted by a speck of dust. It really amazed him. That day, not only did he fall in love with her, he even dreamed of her in his sleep at night, just like when he was young and impulsive. Moreover, knowing that she had once conceived another child for him, Tang Ziyuan's mood was naturally different. Straight man cancer acting up. In his heart, he wanted to continue his relationship with Lin Yun, but firstly, Zhao Ku was too aggressive and would definitely use Tang Xan to restrain him. Secondly, Lin Yun was unwilling. Therefore, Tang Ziyuan felt bitter in his heart. As for his expression towards Lin Yun, Tang Yu only snorted lightly and did not say anything. Seeing that he did not say anything, Tang Ziyuan did not force him. After all, he had indeed let them down. However, he still sighed in his heart. It's a pity that the child was born. If it was born, it would be as cute as Tang Xan. Chapter 374. Tang Ziyuan was stunned. Let's not talk about the past. Since it's already been done, there's no way to regret it. Tang Yu had already stood up. He had no intention of seeing Shen Lian. Tang Ziyuan subconsciously stood up and clasped his son's arm. His voice was trembling. Do you agree with your mother being with Zhao Yi? All these years, with Tang Yu's intelligence, it was impossible for him not to see it. He probably knew about it long ago. But he still put Zhao Yi in an important position. Tang Yu's face was cold. He looked straight at Tang Ziyuan and said slowly, "At least Uncle Zhao can be faithful." Tang Ziyuan was stunned. Then he unconsciously let go of Tang Yu's arm. He laughed self-deprecatingly. Yes, I'm not as good as him. But in his heart, he still felt that Lin Yun still had feelings for him. Otherwise, she would have been with Zhao Yi a long time ago, right? Tang Yu looked down. There was a trace of mockery on his face. Soon, he curled his lips. I won't eat supper. Tell Shen Lian for me. From the beginning to the end, Zhao Ku had nothing to do with it. Tang Ziyuan sighed and still didn't say anything. When Tang Yu walked out, Shen Lian and Zhao Ku happened to be downstairs and saw the car in front of the courtyard start up. Zhao Ku was stunned. She grabbed Tang Ziyuan. Ziyuan, you're not going to stop him. Shen Lian stood there in a white dress. She was extremely beautiful. She smiled lightly. He still doesn't want to see me. She looked at Tang Ziyuan generously. Uncle Tang, I won't disturb you anymore. I'll go back first. Tang Ziyuan responded vaguely and patted her shoulder. In the end, he still broke up with that girl. The daughter of the Sun family is not as good as you. There will always be a chance. Shen Lian looked down and chuckled. Broke up. The entire B city knew about the auction last night. Tang Yu spent 20 billion to sleep with Pei Chi-Chi. This time, it was really expensive. Uncle Tang, I understand. Shen Lian looked up and smiled faintly. She picked up her coat and walked out. Zhao Ku hurriedly saw her out. Shen Lian sat in the car and saw Zhao Ku following. She smiled and said, Auntie Tang, is there anything else? Zhao Ku's expression was a little strange. After a while, she said softly, Go back and send my regards to your parents. Shen Lian indifferently said, I will. Don't worry, Auntie Tang. After Zhao Ku left, she curled her lips and smiled coldly. She had been married to Tang Ziyuan for so many years, yet she still couldn't let go. Greet him. Zhao Ku must be dreaming. Only that fool, Tang Ziyuan, was easy to fool. What kind of woman was Zhao Ku? How could he marry her? She addressed Zhao Ku as Auntie Tang out of respect for Tang Yu. Otherwise, this kind of woman was only fit to be called a chicken. Shen Lian pursed her lips and quickly left. When Zhao Ku returned to the living room, she looked at Tang Ziyuan. She couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Ziyuan, why didn't you ask Tang Yu to stay just now? There was a little complaint in her words. Tang Ziyuan glanced at her, and his voice was a little cold. Are you so concerned about his marriage? Zhao Ku froze, and then put on a stern face. Ziyuan, you can't completely deny me because of that. I've been sincere to you all these years. Your sincerity was used on my money, Tang Ziyuan said without hesitation. At this moment, he missed the days when he was with Lin Yun. Although Lin Yun was a strong woman, she was very indifferent to money. When she asked Tang Yu to inherit Xing Yuan during the divorce, it was mostly because she was angry. Chapter 375. Tang Ziyuan had an indescribable feeling in his heart. At that time, he was blinded by Zhao Ku and had no choice. If he had known that Yun Yun was pregnant, would the result have been different? Whenever he saw Tang Xian, he would feel even worse. No matter what, the child was innocent. So no matter how much he hated Zhao Ku, he couldn't ignore Tang Xian. Zhao Ku was speechless. Tang Ziyuan slowly went upstairs to accompany Tang Xian. Zhao Ku stood alone downstairs, biting her lips. In the end, Tang Ziyuan still cared about what happened last time. She went to see Rong Lei and gave him 1,000,000 yuan. After Rong Lei humiliated her, he promised not to post her nude photos online again. Her face was blurry last time, so Zhao Ku denied it no matter who asked. Time would wash away everything. As long as Tang Xian was there, Tang Ziyuan wouldn't dare to divorce her. A child was too important to her. If Tang Xian passed away one day and she lost her beloved daughter, Tang Ziyuan would be even more reluctant to leave her. She wanted the title of Mrs. Tang for the rest of her life. She couldn't let Lin Yun and Tang Ziyuan be together again. Otherwise, what would she do? She wanted Shen Lian and Tang Yu to be together. On their wedding day, she could openly stand with that person. She wanted that person to take back what he said. She wanted to stand as high as him. She wanted him to regret not having her. She begged him so humbly and gave birth to 2 children for him, but he didn't budge. Maybe he still thought that she aborted the child and that Tang Xian was Tang Ziyuan's child. None of that mattered. What mattered was that she could stand by his side. Zhao Ku laughed. She laughed at her own stupidity and stupidity. How could a woman like her love a man so passionately? Who was Tang Ziyuan? He was just an idiot who didn't know how to appreciate beauty. That person didn't even look at her. He only treated her as a plaything. But she still liked and loved him, humbly followed him. She didn't want a title. But he still didn't want her. Zhao Ku's beautiful but aged eyes were moist. It was only on such a lonely night that she would think of him unscrupulously. She thought of the occasional tenderness he had shown her, the bad things he had done to her, the sins he had done to her. Zhao Ku laughed softly, her eyes filled with tears. Who could understand her loneliness? Her life was absurd, but the only serious thing she had ever done was to love that man with all her heart. Nightscape bar. The deafening music resounded in every corner, and the dim lights exuded a sense of warmth. The perfume, the light alcohol, and the smell of Axe spread to everyone in the bar like contagious infection. In the innermost seat, Rong Lei was drinking with a man. How did you end up in such a bad situation with that Zhao woman? At least you have Tang backing you up. The man with peach blossom eyes looked at Rong Lei. Bro, take it easy. Don't let Tang Ziyuan find someone to destroy you. We can't afford to offend that kind of person. Rong Lei picked up a small piece of food and put it into his beautiful lips. He said with a bit of indifference, "What are you afraid of? If a woman surnamed Zhao had a husband's love, would she still need to hunt for food outside? She's ambitious." Chapter 376. The man smiled ambiguously. Rong Lei patted him on the shoulder. "I'm going to pee. I'll show you how that bitch looks later." The two men revealed their unbearable expressions. Then, Rongley walked towards the washroom. He had drunk too much, so his steps were a little shaky. However, that didn't stop him from flirting with the girls who passed by. But that was all, because the women here weren't his cup of tea. The women here were all looking for relief. Most of them were white-collar workers or Z. What he was looking for was a rich woman. They might be a little old, but so what? Most of these women took good care of themselves. Although they were still different from young girls, they weren't too ugly. Besides, if he really couldn't get interested, he could take medicine. Rongley pursed his lips. He thought of a rich woman who was hanging out recently. She was pretty and had good skills. However, he couldn't do it now that there was someone else serving him. As he thought about it, he bumped into a girl who passed by. The girl had heavy makeup on, but he could see that her facial features were very exquisite. What kind of person was he? He specialized in rolling around with women. When a woman stood in front of him, he could imagine what she looked like naked. Rongley smiled, which he thought was very handsome. He stretched out his hand and the girl was already pressed against the wall. He knew the secrets of picking up girls, so he didn't do anything to the girl immediately. He used his arms and body to trap her, and his face touched her little face like a male seeking a mate. The mixed hormones in the air and his superb skills were enough to conquer this delicate little thing in front of him. Rongley was convinced of this. The girl in front of him closed her eyes slightly and smiled. She touched his collar with her little hand and said with a unique charm, "What do you want?" "First time out to play, huh?" Rongley's lips touched the tip of her ear, and his voice was very hoarse. "Didn't your mother tell you that men are dangerous? What they want is something you can't afford, huh?" He couldn't remember how long it had been since he had flirted with a woman. He had always been dealing with those old women, and it wasn't an exaggeration to say that he had lied to them. How could he give a little bit of his heart to those old women? They treated him as a tool to vent their anger, and he treated them like a bitch. Zhou Meilin was like that, and so was Zhao Ku. In the past 2 years, he had lost interest in women. Most of the time, when he was serving old women, he relied on medicine. As for the girl in front of him, although she wasn't serious, she was undeniably beautiful. Young women were indeed different. Their skin was extremely elastic and full of collagen. This was something that no old woman could do, no matter how well-maintained she was. Just by sticking to her like this, Rongley's impulse was aroused. He smiled devilishly and moved his lips close to her ear. In a low voice, he said, "Baby, wait for me to relieve myself. I'll be back in a while." The girl tilted her head, and the brightness in her eyes was enough to ignite him. Rongley pinched her little face. The sensation of his fingertips was not bad. Satisfied, he walked into the bathroom. Just as he was about to pee, his hand touched his pocket. His cell phone was gone. Shit! Chapter 377. Rongley immediately walked out, but the girl was nowhere to be seen. He was familiar with this place, so he immediately walked over and ordered the bartender to block the door. He believed that the little vixen would not be able to escape from his hands. How dare she steal his phone? She must be tired of living. The amorous eyes and Rongley were looking for someone in the huge bar. From the hall to the private rooms, they searched one by one. Not only them, but also the thugs they were familiar with in the bar. According to Rongley's description, they were going to find the woman in the black dress. The reason why Rongley was so anxious was that there was a top-secret document on his phone. There were dozens of rich women's private information on it. If all of it was leaked, would he be able to keep his life? Some of these women's husbands were in the underworld, and some of them would probably break his arm. Therefore, Ronglei had to get his phone back. Not only would he get it back, but he would also teach that little liar a lesson. He had an evil thought that when the time came, he would definitely make her cry for mercy. He had plenty of ways to torture women. Originally, he still had some tender feelings for her, but now she couldn't blame him. For a moment, even a fly couldn't fly out of the bar. Holding the phone, Pei-Chi-Chi ran as fast as she could. As she ran, she took off her clothes. She took off the black dress, and there was a white sleeveless skirt inside. She let her hair down again, ran to a corner, wiped off the makeup on her face, and applied a crystal jelly-like lip gloss. Finally, she magically took out a feather-like fur from her small bag and draped it over her shoulders. She flipped the small bag over, and it immediately turned from silver to green. In an instant, she seemed to have changed into a different person. However, she still didn't dare to take the risk. Moreover, she had to go through the bathroom to get to the hall from here, so she could only hide upstairs. She heard the movement of people downstairs. She ran in the direction of the second floor, hoping that there would be a small party for her to sneak in. Otherwise, she could only hide in the bathroom upstairs. The doors of the private rooms were all tightly shut, and there was no one outside. What she didn't expect the most was that Ronglei had such strong connections here. In the end, she had to hide in the bathroom. A man and a woman. Pei-Chi-Chi pursed her lips and finally ducked into the men's restroom. She carefully opened a door and tried to hide inside. But as soon as she opened it, she was stunned. There was someone inside. The man was very tall, and his back was facing her. He was urinating. From the back, he had a good figure. The man seemed to have finished urinating. His body trembled slightly as he pulled up his zipper, then, he turned around. Pei-Chi-Chi was stunned, because it was Tang Yu. He glanced at her and very calmly arranged his clothes, not at all afraid of her presence. After he was done, he looked at her from the corner of his eye and then said slowly, "Boss Pei, are you here to meet a client? Dressed like a feather duster. What? Is that your sense of beauty now? Also, come to the men's restroom." He leaned over and seemed to nibble on her ear. Did I not satisfy Boss Pei last night? Of course, he also smelled a hint of alcohol on her. Chapter 378. Pei-Chi-Chi tried hard to suppress the shock in her heart and ignore his slightly mocking words because there were already footsteps outside. Tang Yu carefully looked at Pei-Chi-Chi's little face, not letting go of any expression on her face. "I went the wrong way, Mr. Tang. Sorry to disturb you." She looked like she was going to go out, but then her hand was caught and held in Tang Yu's arms. He lowered his head and looked at the person in his arms. She was different from before. Although she was a little gaudy, she was also charming. Especially that little mouth, it was like jelly, attracting all the attention of men. That was why a pretty boy like Ronglei, who was surrounded by women, would fall into her hands. However, didn't she think about the consequences? People like Ronglei often mingled in such places. How could she escape? At that moment, someone had already opened the door of the men's washroom, and the sound of footsteps could be heard. In this narrow space, with the slight smell of disinfectant and his burning masculine scent, Pei-Chi-Chi felt a little dizzy. She had to use her small hands to support herself against the side of the door to prevent herself from slipping. "Let me guess, those people are here for President Pei." His lips were close to her ear, and his voice was a little hoarse. She felt all the hairs on her body stand up. She closed her eyes and did not dare to make a sound. "Who did you offend?" She did not speak, and he confirmed it by nibbling her little ear. She could not help but tremble, and her fingers suddenly grabbed his back. However, Tang Yu pushed her away a little. "President Pei, please behave yourself. He coughed lightly and said seriously, I am someone with a girlfriend. The people outside were already knocking on the doors of the small cubicles, rude and unreasonable. Pei-Chi-Chi bit her lip, knowing that only Tang Yu could help her now. At that moment, she forgot about Sun Fei-Fei, forgot about the heartless words she said, and forgot about his mockery. She hugged him shamelessly and buried her face in his chest. Her voice was like that of a kitten. Please. With her hugging him like this, the unwillingness, anger, and displeasure in his heart seemed to have calmed down a little. All of his rationality was gone, and what was left was only this little fiery thing in his arms. What are you going to use to beg me? His large palm began to move up her waist. She called out like a kitten, saying no, no, but he had already started to be mean. She had her back to the door, and he was holding her from behind, doing all sorts of unspeakable things to her. Boss Pei, do you like it here? His thin lips pressed against her fair neck as he gently nibbled on it. Even though they had just spent the night together, he was still a little aroused by her. He wanted to hug her so much that his heart ached. He put his other hand in front of her little mouth. Bite it if you can't help it. A thin layer of sweat had already formed on Pei-Chi-Chi's body. He did not actually do anything to her, but he always knew how to tease her. He did not need to do anything to make her break down. Her body did not seem to belong to her. She really wanted to turn around, hug him, and beg him to take her. However, he continued to torture her slowly. Her body was as soft as water. She bit her lip, not daring to scream. However, the more she did this, the more it felt like a taboo. Finally, like a little animal, she desperately turned around and hugged him. Chapter 379. He stumbled and sat down. Pei-Chi-Chi sat in his arms, resting her head on his shoulder. At this moment, the door was pushed open roughly. She whimpered softly and bit his shoulder. The air was filled with the scent of a budding flower that was about to bloom. It was tender and tempting. Tang Yu's breathing was a little messy. No matter what, his eyes had moved. Pei-Chi-Chi was nestled in his arms. At this moment, there was only Tang Yu in this small world. There was no one else. Rong Lei and the peach-blossom-eyed man at the door were also stunned. What was going on? There was actually a man and a woman doing that kind of thing. The woman was sitting in the man's arms, but her clothes were still intact. However, there was an undeniable atmosphere of joy in this place. Rong Lei felt a little uncomfortable. He hadn't touched the woman just now, but he had caught a pair of mandarin ducks. He narrowed his eyes and said to the thugs behind him, "Pull them away. I want to check if this woman is the one just now." Actually, he didn't think so. It was not the same woman at all. But from the back, this woman seemed to have a good figure. So Rong Lei was tempted. The peach-blossom-eyed man stopped him. "Rong Lei, why are you still thinking about this at a time like this?" Rong Lei sneered. "Even if I die, I'll drag her along with me. This is our territory. What's there to be afraid of? So what if he fucked a young lady here?" The peach-blossom-eyed man was also a little envious. "Why don't we detain this girl first? When we find the other one, we can." There was no need to say the rest of his words. Rong Lei naturally agreed. He smiled sinisterly. "Drag her over. Today, each of us will get 5,000 yuan as a tip." He was a professional swindler. He earned money quickly and was very generous. Those thugs were naturally more than happy. Wasn't it just a personal matter? What's so difficult about it? Just as they were about to step forward, Tang Yu pressed Pei-Chi-Chi's head with one hand to prevent them from seeing her slightly flushed face. He took out his phone and dialed a number. "Chief Zhang, I'm Tang Yu. Someone wants to take my female companion away in your area. Yes, it's Night Bar. Chief Zhang. Tang Yu. Rong Lei was dumbfounded. His peach blossom eyes were stunned. The thugs dispersed immediately. They didn't know what had happened just now. They didn't know anything and didn't participate in it. Tang Yu. In Beast City, everyone knew that Tang Yu wanted to kidnap his woman. Wasn't that asking for shit? Everyone left, leaving only Rong Lei and Peach Blossom Eyes looking at each other, not knowing what to do. They wanted to run too, but they didn't dare. Tang Yu helped Pei Chi up. He patted his pants and smiled faintly. Didn't you want to arrest her? Why aren't you coming over now? His Peach Blossom Eyes immediately bowed. Mr. Tang, it's a misunderstanding. Rong Lei had too much to drink. Tang Yu glanced at him and didn't say anything else. He just chided him lightly. You're ruining my mood. He hugged Pei Chi and left. Her face was buried in his chest. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her lips. His voice was hoarse as he murmured at a volume that Rong Lei and Peach Blossom Eyes could hear. We'll continue in the car, That woman didn't say anything and just hugged Tang Yu tightly. Chapter 380. Rong Lei was in a daze for a long time before he said, I thought he was a decent man, but it turns out he's just like that. To think that he would mess around with a woman in the bathroom, he then sneered, continue looking for that girl in black. She must still be in the bar. He had to find her even if he had to dig 3 feet underground. But he might not be able to find her even if he dug 10 feet underground. At this moment, Pei Chi was sitting in Tang Yu's car. He tilted his head, looked at her, and drove away. Where are you going? Pei Chi tugged at her clothes. It was a little cold. He didn't turn on the air conditioner in the car. Tang Yu drove very fast, all the way to Xia City. The black sports car screeched to a stop downstairs, and Pei Chi-Chi's body was knocked back. She looked in front, then pursed her lips. Why are we here? He didn't say anything, just opened the car door and got out. Pei Chi-Chi had no choice but to follow. He didn't speak to her on the way, or in the elevator, until the door was opened. As soon as she walked in, he pressed her against the door. He bent his long leg and stuck it between her body, looking down at her. His dark eyes were so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. Under that gaze, her body couldn't help but tremble. She didn't dare to look into his eyes, but she couldn't bear to look away either, so she just looked up at him. Finally, his long fingers gently touched her red lips. Pei Chi-Chi, you followed me back because you want me to do this to you, right? He lifted his knee, and she let out a muffled moan. Her voice was like a kitten's. Pei Chi-Chi's voice had a tinge of sadness in it. No. No. He sneered, looking down at her little face. No. Why did you come back with me? She was stunned. Pei Chi-Chi, your body is telling me that you want me very much now. He exposed her weakness mercilessly, then threw her jacket away, and her sexy tank top was torn into 2 pieces and piled at his feet. She stood there tenderly, challenging his will. Still caressing her red lips, his voice was low and husky. Now, I want to collect my interest. Right by the door, he took her. He was so strong that he almost tore her body apart. That night, as if he did not know fatigue, he spent half the night moving from behind the door, to the sofa, to the balcony, and finally stumbling into the bedroom. The bedroom was very clean, but there were no sheets on the bed. But no one had time to care, even though it was just that simple. He still hugged her and rolled around for the whole night. After 2 consecutive nights, even Tang Yu was a little exhausted. The 2 of them lay flat on the ground. Although they were exhausted, neither of them felt sleepy. Pei Chi-Chi, did you take the pillow here? His voice was indifferent. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned to look at him. I didn't. Liar. He flipped over and pinned her down again. The end result was that Tang Yu had a slight fever, too much. Pei Chi was a little confused. How could this be? He had been in good health in the past, but he had never done it for 2 consecutive nights. Any man would not be able to take it. Actually, she was not much better. She was also bleeding a little. When he did it, it was as if he did not care about his life. It was as if he wanted to kill her and himself. Chapter 381. The two of them hugged each other and didn't wake up until noon the next day. Pei Chi moved her body. Her entire body was aching, especially when she lifted her leg. There was a sharp pain. She closed her eyes, then closed them again. Her hand touched the person beside her. Tang Yu's body was very hot. She was shocked and immediately got up. She knelt down beside him and touched his forehead. Her palms were burning hot. Tang Yu. She shook him gently. Tang Yu opened his eyes slowly and said in a hoarse voice, Pei Chi, call Qingqing with my phone and ask him to call a doctor. He knew very well that he hadn't slept for 2 nights and hadn't rested during the day. Moreover, he had taken her for 2 nights in a row. He was exhausted. Pei Chi quickly went down and rummaged through his pocket for his phone. She was barely wearing anything. She squatted there with her hair down, looking anxious. The corners of his mouth slowly curled up into a smile. Pei Chi, you still dare to say that you don't love me? You don't care about me? She finally found her phone and quickly dialed Meng Qingqing's number. Meng Qingqing couldn't believe his ears. Pei Chi. Why is it you? Tang Yu has a fever. Can you get a doctor over? Pei Chi said on the phone as she climbed onto the bed and placed her hand on Tang Yu's forehead. At this moment, she forgot about their relationship. Tang Yu closed his eyes. When she placed her hand on his forehead, he felt the anger in his heart calm down. Meng Qingqing asked for the address and immediately called the doctor. Of course, he came over himself. Tang Yu was a little unhappy that he came over. After all, as a young man in the prime of his life, he didn't want others to know about his excessive indulgence. The doctor also held back his laughter and gave him a shot to reduce his fever. He only told him to stop having sex for a few days and to nourish his body. Meng Qingqing sat on the sofa outside and looked at Pei Chi-Chi's room. When the doctor came out and asked about the situation, he looked at Pei Chi-Chi meaningfully. Tang Yu's body had always been very healthy. This time, it was so violent. What kind of play did he have to play for him to collapse? With Pei Xiaoqi's petite body, how many times could he withstand Tang Yu's torment? Pei Xiaoqi, do you want a doctor to take a look at you? Meng Qingqing asked kindly. The doctor smiled at the side. This Meng Qingqing was really too much. Tang Yu had already gotten up and was leaning against the door of the bedroom. His bathrobe was loosely tied and he looked very lazy. Meng Qingqing could not bear to look at it, so he led the doctors to stay. After they left, Pei Chi turned to look at him. Do you want the driver to take you back? Tang Yu did not move. He was still leaning against the door, his eyes deep. Pei Chi, shouldn't you take responsibility? Take responsibility. Should he take responsibility for something like this? Tang Yu smiled. I got sick because I worked too hard on you. Shouldn't you take responsibility? Pei Chi bit her lip. How are you going to take responsibility? His gaze deepened. Shouldn't you take good care of me until I recover? Would he do that to her again after he recovered? Pei Chi lowered her head. You can go back tomorrow. Why was he always here? She had not forgotten that he still had Sun Fei Fei. Chapter 382. He paused for a moment before continuing. She knows about our relationship, and she doesn't mind if we have anything before marriage, as long as we don't have anything to do with each other after marriage. He said it so casually but cruelly. Pei Chi was annoyed as she glared at him. Tang Yu, you jerk. They were very close to each other, and she couldn't help but want to punch him. Tang Yu reached out and caught her little fist, pulling her into his arms. His body was still burning hot, and she was hugged tightly by him. Other than the warmth, there was also his burning scent. She couldn't help but feel her blood heating up. Pei Chi, you seem to be angry. Angry at me or angry at Fei Fei? He said in an extremely hateful tone. She turned her face away awkwardly. I'm not angry. He hooked one arm around her slender waist and pinched her little chin with the other, forcing her to look at him. Even though he was sick, he was still bewitchingly handsome. She couldn't take her eyes off him as she looked up at him. She didn't know that her eyes were a little lecherous. And he was very close to her, his thin lips brushing against hers. She thought that he would want to kiss her. She closed her eyes in a panic. Her long and thick eyelashes couldn't stop fluttering, looking as cute as two brushes. And her slightly upturned little mouth was red and alluring. He really wanted to kiss it. But he only moved his lips to her ear and said in a low voice, if you're not angry, then go down and let me eat you. Down. Pei Chi suddenly opened her eyes and stared at him with wide eyes. Tang Yu also came back to his senses and chuckled. What else? Pei Chi, are you looking forward to me kissing you? No, she said angrily. But before she could finish her sentence, he had already kissed her little mouth. It was scalding, lingering, and even a little rough. Pei Chi was shocked. She twisted her little head, trying to break free from his kiss. But he held her firmly, not letting her escape. His large palms threaded through her hair until it almost hurt. She tried to escape, she tried to hide, but he still pressed her down, his lips blocking her mouth. Her voice was vague and broken. I didn't. The voice was also swallowed into his mouth and crushed to pieces. Their entanglement continued until her body was as soft as water in his arms. In his arms, she raised her little face like a little kitten, licking and kissing him, revealing a trace of hidden desire and pleading. However, Tang Yu let go of her and held her with one hand. He smiled faintly and said, Pei Chi, didn't you say you weren't looking forward to it? Then who is this woman who is begging me? Her little hand was pressed against the door, and her eyes seemed to be filled with a layer of water. She was so beautiful that it was indescribable. Fragile and alluring. His fingers caressed the corner of her lips, and his voice was hoarse. If you do this, I'll think you want to kiss me again. This time, she had learned her lesson and did not refute. Because if she spoke, he would kiss her. But she only looked at him with such a tender gaze. He still lowered his head and kissed her little mouth again, his large palms moving along her pajamas. While she was in a daze, Pei Chi pushed him away. No matter what, she still remembered that he was sick. Tang Yu retracted his hand, and the expression on his face became a little unfathomable. He stood there and smiled faintly. Her legs were wobbly, and she said softly, I'll go downstairs. Chapter 383. She walked into the kitchen. After a while, she couldn't help but turn around and see that he was smoking. Pei Chi hesitated for a moment. Tang Yu, must you smoke? Even his tone was cautious, and he was not used to it. He pinched the cigarette and looked at her. Miss Pei, are you trying to control me? She paused for a while and said, did I cross the line? Fei Fei doesn't dare to control me. Fei Fei, it's Fei Fei again. Then why don't you ask her to cook for you? Why don't you sleep at her place? Pei Chi stood in the kitchen. She was finally a little angry, and she looked a little fierce. Tang Yu was also stunned. Then, he chuckled and looked at her. Miss Pei, are you jealous? I'm not. She lowered her head and continued to cook without a backbone. I'm just reminding Mr. Tang not to forget that he has a girlfriend. He sat on the armrest of the sofa and smoked. Thank you for reminding me. He was always having a fever. After smoking, he actually started coughing violently. Pei Chi still walked over and took the cigarette from his hand. If you smoke again, get out of here. As she said this, her little face was tense. Tang Yu looked at her, a little surprised. She was timid, weak, and sensitive, but she never dared to be so rude in front of him. Was this considered concern? He felt a little happy in his heart. Then, he pulled her over. He leaned on her with his long arms and legs, and she was like a little doll beside his legs. He leaned close to her, and his eyes gazed deeply into hers. Let go of me. She blushed and pursed her lips. The noodles are going to burn. Tang Yu was still looking at her, but he was kind enough to let go of her body and even patted her butt. Pei Chi almost jumped up and almost ran away. Tang Yu's gaze was a little unpredictable. Pei Chi, if you let go now, it might not hurt so much in the future. But why? I'd rather be in pain. I'd rather you be in pain too. Still unwilling to let go. He didn't smoke again because he believed that if he dared to smoke again, she would really kick him out. Pei Chi cooked the noodles and sat with him. They didn't say much and just ate quietly. She also realized that he did not eat much. One bowl was enough. Because of his body, she didn't put chicken shreds in it. Instead, she put a few pieces of vegetables and 2 mushrooms in it. It looked delicious. After Tang Yu finished eating, he wanted to smoke a cigarette out of habit, but he decided against it. He went to her bedroom and lay there, watching the news with his cell phone in his hand. Pei Chi came in with a glass of water. You have to take your medicine. Just now, the doctor had told her not to eat on an empty stomach, so she brought water and medicine over. Tang Yu was still lying down, as if he hadn't heard anything. He was still looking at his phone, and his expression was especially dignified. Pei Chi stood there, pursing her lips and meowing like a kitten. Time to take your medicine. He still didn't pay attention to her. Mr. Tang is so childish, Pei Chi bit her lip. If it weren't for his fever, she wouldn't have begged him. But she really felt a little sorry for him, Tang Yu. She said in a cat-like voice like a little wife. Chapter 384. His tone was natural and confident. Although Pei Chi didn't want to, she was more afraid that he would change his mind and refuse to take it. Now, Tang Yu was as awkward as an old man who was going through menopause. She leaned over and stretched out her little hand. The medicine is here. She was waiting for him to take it, but she didn't expect that Tang Yu would actually lower his head and put the 2 pills into his mouth on her palm. His lips were on her soft palm, and it was a little ticklish and numb as if she had been electrocuted. Pei Chi's other hand didn't hold the cup properly, and the water in the cup almost spilled out. Tang Yu gestured with his eyes. She pursed her lips and brought the cup to his lips. Tang Yu took a sip from her hand. After taking the medicine, he frowned again. The water is a little cold. Pei Chi took a sip herself. It was all right, but she still asked softly, should I get some hot water? He grunted coldly. Pei Chi immediately went to get a cup of hot water. But when she came in, she saw that Tang Yu was changing his clothes and looked like he was about to leave. When she came in, he had already put on his sweater and was putting on his coat. He looked up and saw her at the door. Tang Yu's voice was indifferent. "I have to leave." Seeing that she was still standing at the door in a daze, he smiled and looked a little gentle. "Feifei has returned to the country. I have to go to the airport to pick her up." Pei Chi-Chi's blood almost froze. Although she had already expected such an outcome, when he said it out loud, she really felt very sad, getting off her bed to dote on someone else. She lowered her head and didn't say anything. Naturally, she wouldn't make him stay. His gentle expression just now was for someone else. The gentleness that had once belonged to her completely now belonged to someone else. Tang Yu was already dressed and walking out. When he passed by her, his body paused. Pei Chi-Chi could feel his warm breath on top of her. "The driver is waiting for me downstairs," he said calmly. "I'm leaving." She raised her eyes sharply, but he was still looking at her, and she looked straight into his eyes. Tang Yu didn't leave immediately. He looked at her attentively. After gazing at each other for a long time, she softly agreed. She didn't notice that his gaze had become a little cold, and the trace of gentleness at the corner of his mouth had disappeared. He straightened his body, and without saying anything more, walked out in a straight line. As the door closed, Pei Chi-Chi lowered her head and smiled bitterly. Actually, it was a good thing that he left. The person who gave birth to her not only caused her mother to have a miscarriage, but it was highly possible that he was also the one who instigated someone to hit Jinrong, so it was really good that he had left. The past 2 days were just a dream. Dreams will always wake up. Pei Chi-Chi ran into the bedroom and took out the cell phone from the small bag. The account number had been cancelled by Ronglei, but the things stored in it were still there, especially some interesting pictures in the photo album. Pei Chi-Chi flipped through the pictures one by one and found quite a number of pictures that were related to Zhao Ku. Especially a few pictures where Zhao Ku was sprawled on the floor without any clothes on. Her fingers were clenched tightly. Not only that, when she turned on the recording, she could hear the conversation between Ronglei and Zhao Ku. Although it was a conversation while they were having sex. The ambiguous voice was mixed with a conspiracy that made one's hair stand on end. Chapter 385. Zhao Ku's voice had a hint of laziness, "Because I'm happy." Then came the unbearable sound. Ronglei pressed Zhao Ku down again. The phone slipped from Pei Chi-Chi's hand. She raised her head and chuckled. Her smile was a little bitter. It turned out that the person who wanted to kill her was Zhao Ku, the woman who gave birth to her. Killing her was to stop her from marrying into the Tang family. If it was just because she had a child before marriage, Pei Chi-Chi thought that Tang Ziyuan wouldn't do anything to her. After all, they had Tang Xin. Then, what made Zhao Ku do this? Pei Chi-Chi listened to it over and over again, but she still couldn't figure it out. But she was sure that she couldn't pretend that she didn't know and that nothing had happened. Jinrong was still lying on the bed, unconscious. How innocent was he? Looking at the photo on the phone, Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips. Finally, she registered a secondary account on a certain website. That was a dating website that specialized in finding extramarital affairs and whatnot. She used Zhao Ku's photo as her profile picture, and her phone number was also Zhao Ku's. Of course, she protected her IP to make sure that no one could trace it back to her. After doing all this, her body was exhausted. She fell on the sofa and bit her fingers. She never thought that one day, she would become her mother's enemy. But she knew that it wasn't revenge. It was just to get justice. She didn't call the police. She admitted that it was out of selfishness. She didn't want him to know that she was Zhao Ku's daughter. She didn't want Tang Yu to know her identity and look at her like that. She would rather let him think that she loved Jinrong. The computer made a ding sound. Pei Chi quickly looked at it. In just a few minutes, the secondary account was followed by hundreds of people. The comments were very explicit. It was full of, "Baby, add me. Big brother loves you. Big brother is the best. I like this kind of slutty young woman the most." The power of this website was like an atomic bomb. Soon, Zhao Ku's desires filled the online media. Pei Chi thought that Zhao Ku would soon go to find Rong Lei, if she guessed correctly. She looked at it for a long time, then suddenly closed the notebook. She hated scheming, but today, she had also become the person she hated. Downstairs, Tang Yu did not leave immediately. He sat in the limousine and received a call from the so-called king. The king was a hacker among hackers and also a detective. His voice was indifferent as he spoke to Tang Yu. Miss Pei used her own computer to register a secondary account. The content is quite explosive. Mr. Tang, you can browse through the news right now. The entertainment section has already appeared. Tang Yu narrowed his eyes and clenched his fists. The truth was not far away, it was just that he was waiting for the final result. Without the result, he seemed to be unwilling to believe that it was like that. "Protect her account and don't let anyone find out," he ordered and hung up the phone. After browsing through the news, a large number of wife photos of Zhao Ku suddenly appeared. Needless to say, it was Pei Chi-Chi's work. Those photos were very large, and some of them were of her face. Zhao Ku could not deny it even if she wanted to. In particular, it was obvious that it was a matter of marriage at first glance. On the one hand, she looked to be in her 30s. On the other hand, the pigeon egg in her hand was obviously a gift from Tang Ziyuan. Looking at it now, she felt it was a kind of irony. Chapter 386. Zhao Ku was about to go crazy. Men kept calling her on her phone. The first thing they said was baby. Then, they said dirty things that were unbearable to the ears. Those men all wanted to date her, and some even directly sent her their own photos, the kind with clothes on top but nothing on the bottom. Those pictures made her want to vomit. Her phone rang non-stop for the entire afternoon. In the end, she had no choice but to turn it off. She didn't know which bastard leaked her information on a social media site. That was why this happened. Zhao Ku wanted to get someone to investigate, but Tang Ziyuan was there. She didn't dare to make a sound. However, her expression was always ugly. The phone rang. Tang Ziyuan picked it up and glanced at Zhao Ku. "It's yours." Zhao Ku looked at him suspiciously but still picked up the phone. It was a member of the rich wife group that Zhao Ku usually played cards with. When she heard Zhao Ku's voice, she screamed, "Zhao Ku, was that your Tang Ziyuan who picked up the phone just now?" Something big happened. Zhao Ku's heart skipped a beat. She coughed lightly. "Playing cards. I'll be there in a while." She didn't dare to discuss it over the phone. She knew that something bad was going to happen. She looked at Tang Ziyuan and smiled. "A group of sisters asked me to play cards. If I don't go, it'll be a little disappointing." Tang Ziyuan drank his tea and said calmly, "Go if you want to." "When did you tell me?" Zhao Ku was a little bored. She pursed her lips. She didn't care about putting on makeup and just left. She even took her phone with her. She drove her own car outside and stopped at an empty space. She dialed the rich lady's number and asked, "What happened just now?" That woman was still being unreasonable. "Zhao Ku, it's not that we don't want to help you this time. It's really clear that no one will believe us if we say it's not you." "What is it?" Zhao Ke asked anxiously. Wait a moment. You have to hold on. I'll send it to you later. Don't let your Tang Ziyuan know about it. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. The rich wife talked for a long time. Her main point was to not let Tang Ziyuan know. But now that there were photos everywhere, how could Tang Ziyuan hide it? After a while, Zhao Ke received those unsightly photos of herself. The technique came from Ronglei. Her face turned ashen. How did these photos get out? He dialed Ronglei's number, but Ronglei didn't pick up. With a pale face, she drove to Ronglei's place. When they arrived, Zhao Ke was stunned. Ronglei was packing his luggage. What are you doing? Zhao Ke stood by the door, her face pale. She also had a feeling that something big was about to happen. After Ronglei lost his phone, he felt uneasy. In the afternoon, as expected, Zhao Ke's flowed out. He vaguely felt that someone wanted to mess with Zhao Ke. That girl, and meeting Tang Yu in the night scene. Could all these be a coincidence? However, Ronglei was also a smart person. He would not tell Zhao Ke about this. He would rather let her think that this was a bad thing and that he was the one who leaked her photos. That was all. He wanted to run away, so he could not let her know that there was a bigger problem waiting for him. Ronglei looked at her, then put down the luggage in his hands. The corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile. As you can see, I'm going abroad. I'm lacking some money. How about it, Mrs. Tang, give me some. Chapter 387. Zhao Ke was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She was in such a miserable state now, and he still wanted to ask her for money. Ronglei, you're heartless. Zhao Ke walked over and poured his luggage on the ground like a madman. What will I do if you leave? Why did those photos appear on the internet? Yeah, why? He smiled wickedly. Mrs. Tang, what do you think? I just want to play with you. I want you to have a taste of being treated as a piece of rotten meat by so many men. How is it? Does it feel good? Zhao Ke was so angry that she slapped Ronglei's face. With a slap, the air almost froze. Zhao Ke was also shocked. She bit her lip guiltily and couldn't help but step back. Ronglei reached out to touch his face. It hurt like fire. He had actually been violated by women many times. In this line of work, he was the dog of rich women, lying on the ground to make them happy. But now, did Zhao Ke really think that she was the Mrs. Tang from before? If Tang Ziyuan knew about those things, could she still be Mrs. Tang? Ronglei slowly turned around. The light in his eyes made Zhao Ke a little afraid. She stepped back and finally pressed her back against the wall. And he walked in front of her and pinched her neck with one hand. Do you think that I'm still the dog that wagged my tail in front of you and begged for mercy? It seems that the last lesson didn't make you obedient. He didn't mind teaching her a little more before he left. Zhao Ke tiptoed and looked at the man in front of her in fear. She and this young man had a relationship a long time ago. When this man was 19 years old, she was the one who seduced him and completed his first time. Men around the age of 20 were the most energetic. That night, Zhao Ke tasted the joy of being a woman. Compared to Tang Ziyuan, Ronglei was indeed a very good partner. Zhao Ke had obtained a lot of satisfaction from him, but now, she could no longer control this man. Finally, he pinched her throat and said gloomily, "It seems that the last lesson was not enough. What do you want to do?" Zhao Ke's eyes widened as she stared at Ronglei, her voice trembling. Ronglei chuckled, "What do you want to do? Don't you usually like to fool around with men? I'm sure you've never seen yourself like this before." He smiled coldly, and Zhao Ke felt her hair stand on end. She swallowed her saliva. Ronglei took out his phone from his pocket and switched to the live broadcast. He placed it on the table at the side and faced the camera. He did not take a picture of his face, only showing Zhao Ke's face. Then he pressed her down and caressed her red lips wickedly. Think about it. You'll be seen by the whole world like a bitch later. What a joyous occasion. He wanted to pretend to be noble, but he, Ronglei, couldn't do it. He would beat her from heaven to hell. Zhao Ke was stunned for a moment before she screamed, "You can't do this to me." Why not? Ronglei tore off her luxurious coat with one hand and threw it aside. "Mrs. Tang, don't you like it the most when I have sex with you? You like it the most when I use all kinds of methods. You like it the most when I use the most despicable way to do it to you. You like it that way." Chapter 388. He pulled her hair and tortured her, treating her like a dog. Ronglei sneered. "Mrs. Tang, how does it feel to be treated like an animal?" Zhao Ke's head hit the wall again and again. Soon, her face was bruised. Her body was in pain as well. She wriggled around in pain, refusing to look at the camera. But when she refused, Ronglei hit her harshly, pulling her hair and slamming her against the wall. "I told you not to look, I told you not to look." He was almost crazy. Zhao Ke's face was bruised and swollen, and so was her body. Her face was red and swollen. She closed her eyes and was forced to face the camera. There were thousands of people watching her. This was a video room for friends in the same city. Zhao Ke knew that she was finished. Even if Tang Ziyuan didn't divorce her, she would have no place to stand. At this moment, she seemed to have returned to the past. It was as if she had returned to her teenage years. She was raped by her stepfather when she was only in her teens. She cried and screamed that animal, but he didn't let her go. Her eyes were so swollen that they looked like slits. She looked at the camera blankly. Suddenly, Zhao Ke was stunned. Ronglei didn't use this phone. Even when she saw him a few days ago, he didn't use this phone. A crazy idea came into her mind. Those photos on the internet weren't taken by Ronglei. They were taken by someone else. Then, was there something else on his phone? Last time, he threatened her to give him money. Otherwise, he would leak the recording of their conversation about killing Pei Chichi. Of course, she knew that he didn't dare to do it because he was the one who found her. Zhao Ke clenched her teeth. Her whole body was cold. She felt that she was about to lose her power. Maybe what happened today was a conspiracy. She had fallen into a trap. No, she couldn't let Ronglei leave. If he left, as long as she found him, he would definitely sell her out. As long as Ronglei was dead, even a recording would be useless. In Zhao Ke's eyes, there was a trace of coldness. The man behind her and her ugly stepfather overlapped. Her once beautiful face was now swollen like a meat bun. She raised her head, and there was a sinister look in her eyes. All these men who trampled on her had to die. The old man was one, and so was Ronglei. Finally, Ronglei released her. Zhao Ke's legs went limp and she slid to the ground. Her entire body was in a mess, and there was not a single part of her that could be seen. Ronglei zipped up his pants, looked at her coldly, and kicked her again. "It's just an old woman like you. If I want to sleep with you, it depends on my mood. If I'm not in a good mood, I won't be interested." He bent down to pick up her bag, took out tens of thousands of yuan, and threw the bag at her face. "Why don't you look at yourself in the mirror? Do you think you're an 18-year-old girl?" He turned off the live broadcast on his phone and put it in his pocket. He went to the bathroom to wash up and prepared to leave in a while. When he entered the bathroom, Zhao Ku slowly got up from the ground. She ran her hand through her hair and walked to the coffee table. There was an exquisite fruit knife on it. She picked it up and hid it on her body. When Rong Lei came out and saw Zhao Ku getting up, he was stunned for a moment. Then he sneered. Not enough. Give me the money, and I'll satisfy you again. Chapter 389. Rong Lei wasn't interested anymore. He picked up his luggage and was about to leave. If he left, he wouldn't appear in B City for at least 5 years. He had a premonition that the person behind this would definitely think of a way to kill Zhao Ku. He was also involved in this matter, so he had to leave. Zhao Ku hugged Rong Lei from behind. Her hoarse voice carried a hint of gentleness. Rong Lei, can you really bear to leave me? Rong Lei was stunned. Being hugged by her like this, he thought of how good Zhao Ku had been in the past. She was indeed the person who had brought him into the industry. At that time, her young body had also brought him pleasure. For a period of time, Zhao Ku was like a drug to him. He couldn't get rid of it no matter what. All he wanted to do was to sleep on the same bed with her and do it with her day and night. Rong Lei, you lost your phone, didn't you? Zhao Ku's voice softened. If we can't escape, then you have to take me with you. As she spoke, she tightened her arms and hugged him tightly. Rong Lei sighed softly, I'm not lying to you. The phone was stolen, so Zhao Ku, you'd better take care of yourself. I have no way of taking you away. You know that I'm a man who eats women's food. How could I take you away? It was said that actors were heartless and whores were heartless. He, Rong Lei, was actually considered a whore, just that he was a man. Rong Lei, is there no way out if we don't escape? Zhao Ku's voice was still soft, but her eyes were filled with murderous intent. Indeed, he had lost his phone. But who was the person who had the phone? It wasn't important who it was. What was important was that Rong Lei had to die. In the past, Zhao Ku wouldn't have done it herself. But now, it was too late. If she waited any longer, Rong Lei would escape. If he was found by someone else, her life would be over. Anyone who stood in her way would die. A knife appeared in Zhao Ku's hand and she pressed it against Rong Lei's back. However, her voice was soft. Rong Lei, I will miss you. Rong Lei was oblivious to the fact that death was already upon him. He laughed dryly and said, Did you feel a little good being God just now? Be good and wait for me to come back. We'll continue. Come back. Zhao Ku chuckled and whispered into his ear, Rong Lei, you won't be coming back. Rong Lei was about to say something, but a knife had already silently cut through his flesh and stabbed straight into his heart. His heart skipped a beat. Pain, sharp pain. He lowered his head and saw that his chest was bleeding profusely. The blood soaked his clothes and dripped down drop by drop. He wanted to struggle, but the woman behind him hugged him tightly. Rong Lei, I bet you didn't expect this day to come. Zhao Ku hugged him tightly and laughed crazily. When you defiled me, you also didn't expect to die in my hands, right? The knife in Zhao Ku's hand moved forward and also sent away Rong Lei's love. Her face was distorted. Those men who treated me as a plaything did not have a good ending. And Rong Lei was just a pet that she had raised in the past. He dared to treat her like this. Zhao Ku laughed coldly and used the knife in her hand to stab Rong Lei for more than 10 times, and minced him into pieces. Rong Lei fell into a pool of blood. His legs kept twitching and his eyes were wide open, his lower body was covered in blood. The bright red blood slowly seeped to Zhao Ku's feet. She looked at him without a trace of expression on her face. There was no fear, because she had experienced things that were scarier than this. Chapter 390. Zhao Ku took the phone out of Rong Lei's pocket and put it in her bag. She then used a towel to wipe off the fingerprints on the knife, as well as the traces she had left in the house. She took away his cash and rummaged around the house, creating the illusion of a burglary. After doing all this, she looked at Rong Lei lying there and smiled coldly. This was the result of ruining her. She calmly picked up her phone and dialed Tang Ziyuan's number. "Ziyuan, my sisters asked me to go to Macau to play a few rounds. I won't be back for the next few days." Tang Ziyuan didn't care. He was annoyed to see Zhao Ku. After hanging up, Zhao Ku put on her sunglasses and covered her face with a silk scarf. But when she opened the door, she was stunned. A few men in uniform were standing outside, and the badges on their bodies made her see stars. The leader looked serious. "We received information that there is a criminal case here. Madam, we have to go in and check, so you can't leave now." Zhao Ku's lips moved, and she lost her voice, unable to speak. After a long time, she said in a hoarse voice, "No, when I came, it had already happened." She suddenly screamed, "Police, there is murder here. Murder. It's so scary." Her hands grabbed the man desperately, and there was a hint of fear in her eyes. However, this trace of fear came from himself. The police had seen this kind of trick many times. He pushed away her claw-like hands and said to the two rookie policemen beside him, "You two look after her. The rest of you, follow me in." Actually, they had already determined what had happened inside. The woman's face was bruised, and besides the smell of blood, there was also the ambiguous smell of love between a man and a woman. Murder of passion. The police went in. Zhao Ku struggled, but she couldn't break free. She watched helplessly as he squatted down and touched Rong Lei's body. There was no breath, but it was still warm and not completely cold. The old police officer took out his phone from his pocket and dialed the number of the headquarters. "There's a murder case here. Ask the forensic doctor to come immediately. The address is XXX." He put on his gloves again and looked at the knife. Then, he looked at Zhao Ku, who was at the door, and smiled faintly. He said, "The technique is quite cruel. It looks like her heart is going to be crushed." Although the woman's face was bruised and swollen, upon closer inspection, she seemed somewhat familiar. After so many years, the old policeman still remembered some of the past. That was many years ago, more than 20 years ago. It was also such a case of stabbing someone to death with a blunt weapon. The old man was a well-known honest man on an old street, but he was stabbed to death by a group of local ruffians. During the trial, there was a teenage girl, the stepdaughter of the man. She was beautiful, but she was unusually calm when she gave her testimony. At that time, he thought that this girl was either cold-blooded or a murderer. However, that case was left unsolved in the end because the hooligans who committed the murder couldn't be found at all because there were too many people. The woman in front of him overlapped with the teenage girl at that time. They were shockingly similar. The old police officer pulled open Rong Lei's pants and took a quick look. Then, he covered his nose. It was the same. He was killed after that. He knew what was going on. He straightened up and slowly walked to Zhao Ku. He bent down slightly and looked at Zhao Ku carefully. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.